Hi everyone, this is Asim here. Welcome back to our channel. Happy New Year to all. Hope you are enjoying this new year. With new energy, you are learning a lot of new things. So there are a few announcements. First, there would be a live stream next weekend. So I'll be posting the details by this Saturday or Sunday on my Twitter. So keep an eye on that. And second thing, there's a new batch of web pen testing course that I usually take on live sessions. So the batch size is usually like less than 10. So I don't like to get a lot of crowd there for now. And it's quite manageable for me for 10 students. So yeah, the course details and like some of the pricing and all that is mentioned on my Telegram channel. So if you haven't been there, go to that channel and look out for like the course details. If you have any questions regarding, let's say, the course content or the pricing or anything like that, ping me up on Twitter. I'd be happy to reply on that. Try to fill the form by this weekend so that whatever the formalities are or whatever the people who are ready to enroll for the paid course, I would complete it by next Wednesday so that by Saturday we can start the course. The course would be solely on weekends, so 1 hour on each day, Saturday and Sunday. And the previous course, like the previous batch has just ended, or it would be ending on this Saturday, so the last class is there. So it's the course is slightly for the beginners. So if you're already good at bug bounties and stuff, so it might not be for you. Also, if you're looking for cybersecurity jobs or how to create a resume or something like that, so there's a dedicated session for that as well. Now let's start with this. Today we are going to talk about Xxe. It's XML External Entity. So what, why, and how, the structure as I've always talked about. So let's see an overview of this video as to what is the course content for this. So first we're going to talk what is an Xxe. To understand what is an Xxe, you need to know what is a XML, why it is used, and why JSON is being used preferably over XML. So yeah, that's in the second thing. The third thing is about types of Xxe, and fourth, the potential impact as to what kind of criticality it would have if you find an Xxe on the server. In the next part, we would be seeing how to exploit an Xxe. So there would be steps around that, and then we would see the same steps being applied on a practical lab on Portsfigure. In the last, I would be discussing a report about an Xxe on Twitter. So that fetched the reporter around 10K. So let's start with this. So first question is, what is an Xxe? So it's a type again of attack against an XML parser. So usually the XML parsers, if they are like, let's say, improperly configured, then these payloads, the XML payloads, they are interpreted in a form that helps the attacker gain some access to the system or gain some, let's say, sensitive file disclosure on the system. So that's an Xxe. So the input payload is usually an XML payload, and the victim, or let's say the culprit, you could say, that's the XML parser. So that's an Xxe attack. So now you might ask, what is an XML? Because I already told that you need to have an XML payload to execute an Xxe attack. So on the right, you can see there's this XML payload. So this is basically a data transport form. So if you could see, it looks very similar to HTML. Like it has an opening tag, then the closing tag, and similar thing like that. On the very top, you could see there's the version and the encoding type, the UTF-8. And then you see the menu tag and the area tag. There's the opening area tag, then there's the area closing tag. So that's XML. So it stands for Extensible Markup Language, and it's like designed for storing and like transporting data. So earlier, when there was no JSON, it was used to transport data. And you could like see that there's a tree like structure of tags and data, like similar to what we see in HTML. So the obvious advantage that you might see of this or of JSON over this is that JSON is a lot concise than this XML. So the very clear advantage that you could see of JSON over XML, and that's why JSON is being preferred over XML, is that JSON takes a lot less like amount of bytes that's being transferred to transfer the data. So it doesn't have opening and closing tags. You just need to have just one key value pairs. So it saves a lot of bandwidth and thus enables faster communication. An improvement over that is the binary protocols such as protobuf and stuff. So those are not human readable, whereas JSON is human readable. So people prefer that. So yeah, that's XML, and like that's why XML is being on the declining popularity, I would say. Most of the recent applications they use JSON. XML entities. So the next thing is XML entities. So these are a way of representing an item of data. For example, the entities ampersand LT semicolon ampersand GT semicolon represent the characters less than and greater than. And it's similar to like you would have seen in URL encoding or HTML encoding, these gets encoded. So XML entities are similar to that. Now let's talk about the types of Xxe. So there are like basically there are two types of Xxe, the basic and the blind Xxe. But on the basis of the attack type, it could be categorized into four types. So the first is basically used to retrieve files. Then there's these Xxe where it's being used for SSRF attacks. Then the third one is for exfiltrating data, which is using an out of band attack, which is kind of an advanced thing. And then the last one is retrieving data via error messages. So sometimes you create an error and then some data gets leaked into that, like let's say your file path or maybe the variables or the debug logs, so something like that. So these are the four types of Xxe. Now if you ask me the potential impacts, so like there could be DOS. So there's this classic billion laugh attack, and that's what the payload is. The screenshot is there on the right side. So this screenshot is for the billion laugh attack. So denial of service. What happens is the XML parser, like it gets into a recursion loop. So if you are not in the computer science, so recursion is basically calling again itself. So that's recursion. So like if you see the diagram on the photo on the right side, so there you could see that entity LOL. So it's the third line, entity LOL and LOL. And then in the like payload section, this entity is basically XML entities encoded like ampersand LOL semicolon. So this LOL is again called inside this entity, and then again it's being called, and in that there's a recursion there. So that's a DS, and due to this, there's the resources get exhausted, and there's this denial of service. Disclosure of confidential data, LFI. So we would see in this like Portugal lab as well as in the Twitter report as to how the attacker could get access to the etc password file. You could have access to a lot of other files as well. etc password is just symbolic for any LFI. SSRF, port scanning from the perspective machine. So like you could do port scanning internally as well using this Xxe attacks, because there's this SSRF thing there. Now let's talk about the steps that you need to take to exploit an Xxe. So first, figure out the endpoint that take XML as input, or try to change the input type to text/XML and submit the XML data to those endpoints. So either way, you just need to supply the XML payload to that. And it's like you could easily see that if it's taking a JSON input, it might be that the same endpoint is also taking XML. It's just that the client or the web application is not sending it in the XML form, rather it's sending it in the JSON form. So you could change the input type to text/XML and submit the XML data to those endpoints. Then the next thing is, and the last stage, you could use the Xxe payloads. If need be, you need to modify those to your needs. Like I would be showing how we would be modifying it very slightly to suit our needs. So you need to understand the payload. Just putting the payload and throwing it through the burp or any other like automated tools, that won't work. You should understand where the like payload should go and how it should be used to exploit that. So let's come to the lab, exploiting Xxe using external entities to retrieve files. So here's the lab. I've started my burp proxy, and this is the community edition one. So it's enough for our use case. You need not have a pro version for this. Let's enable a Foxy proxy. So Foxy proxy is an add-on that I use for switching proxies easily. So let's see, we have this here. Proxy, we could disable this. Let's come back to this, back to the lab. So I forgot to show the lab description. Uh, so the lab says that this lab has a check stock feature that parses XML input and returns any unexpected values in the response. To solve the lab, inject an XML external entity to retrieve the contents of etc password. So we have to retrieve the contents of etc password, which is the second use case that I already talked, that's retrieving sensitive data. So here's the lab. Let's see view details. So here's this check stock function, and let's see it here. So here's the post request that's being sent, and here's the XML that's being sent there. So let's send it to repeater. Control R is the shortcut for that, and Control Shift R is to switch to the repeater tab. So like you don't have to lift your like you don't have to use your mouse. So yeah, here's that. Yeah, here's the request response. So let's send it once. Yep. Now let's see some of these Xxe payloads. So I just go to the first link that I found here. There are like a lot of payloads here. So here's the file disclosure one, and what happens. So only these two lines are sufficient because this is the data which is actually here. So this stock check one. So we just need to replace it this here. And instead of etc shadow, we need to access etc password file. And next thing you should pay attention to is that this ent is the data where the output will be shown. So like ent was here, so ent is being added here. So in this case, product id was the value where we have to insert ent, because basis on the product id, this 518 is being sent here. So let's do this. Oh, sorry. Now let's send it to the server, and you could see invalid product id, and in this error we got all these data. So this is how we get data from the server. So first you insert this payload here, and then you check for this whatever variable you have set it here. So we have set it ent, so we put it here, and the same variable converting it into an xml entity, we add it to the product id. You could try it in different parameters as well. Like if it didn't work in the product id, you would try it in the store id, and then it should work there. So yeah, I think that was that, and you could see congratulations, it's all the lab. So that was a pretty straightforward, and even the Twitter example that I'm gonna show, that's also very straightforward. So let me show it here. So this is the report that the researcher sent to Twitter. He found an XXE on this particular domain in the SXMP processor. So it was reported on 12th July 2017, and for this he was awarded 10k. All severity was medium, 5.3. So the good thing I liked about, apart from the XXE, is the kind of reporting that this person did. It was a very professional report. If you read through it, very professionally has written it out, and not like posting random stuff and just increasing the size of the report. Just to the point, he has answered all the things and questions, and that's what I liked about this report. So there were other reports as well, but they were not very in depth and professionally written. So I chose this one. What type of issue you're reporting? He identified an XXE on CloudHopper SXMP servlet on this particular area, and this aligns to, he mentioned the OWASP page where you find the XML XXE entity processing article. How does a user reproduce an issue? So there was this post request that was being sent to this API endpoint, and the host was this SMSB VIP. So here he used the same payload, XML encoding. He changed the encoding, or he found a different payload. But you could see that here is this file variable. He has filled the file variable with etc password. So he's instructing the XML parser to get the etc password file and insert the value into the file parameter. And that file parameter he has inserted into this XML entity into the operator ID. So the same way we did this. So we instructed the XML parser to get the etc password contents into the ENT, and then pass it into here. So once it was passed here into the response, we got that error that product ID was wrong, and this was the product ID because XML parser was fetching this ENT value from etc password and inserting it into the product ID. So this is kind of an error based XML one thing also. So the last one that I talked about in the previous slides. So let's come back to the report. So here we got this etc password into the file variable, and this file entity was passed into the operator ID, and he got the same error that unable to convert this to integer for operator ID, similar to what we saw in the product ID case. So he further mentions that in addition to the local file, it was confirmed that testing is replaced with a URL. So he tried with an external web server as well, and the servlet will make external requests that it has outbound access to internet. So it proved that the servlet that was being exploited, it had access to the external resources, because instead of just checking with file protocol, he also tested with the HTTP or HTTPS protocols. So he mentions the impact that trust relationship can be exploited with the server, and that can be used to pivot and scan for the host on the same network. He mentions what are some scenarios, and he mentioned that remote attacker can utilize this vulnerability to read from the file system, and also this can be used to scan other ports as well. Suggested fix, he mentioned that if it's not in use, remove it from the server. If it is in use, reduce the functionality of the XML parser such that entities are not resolved. So I would be also talking about that also in the slide. So how as a DevOps or DevSecOps person, as a security engineer, how you would protect it if you got the same on your server or on your company. Also, if you're reporting to the company, so instead of just reporting the problem, it's good that you also report the solution. Conclusion, and this is a very good thing that he mentions, that I don't want to flood the report with the stuff you are probably well aware of. So a lot of people they used to mention hypothesis using this could be happening, and then there would be an RC. So that's not how people perceive it. So if you have something, if you can show an impact, then it's well and good. So just showing hypothesis that this could be done, this could be done, it's very speculative. So if it's very probable and it's being done in the 90% of the cases, here he showed access to the file system, and then he talks that can be used to access the local file server, because that's a very probable thing which people do using Xxe. But if you would say that using Xxe you might have got RC because there could have been a servlet which was vulnerable to this particular version, so that's all hearsay, that there's nothing concrete about it. The only thing concrete about this is that there's an SSRF or there's an Xxe attack, and using that you could leverage, you could fetch LFI and you could do some SSRF thing, or you could pivot that to get the idea about the nearby host. So that's the very concrete thing, and that's what he has mentioned, and not mentioning unnecessary stuff. So that's what I was talking about, that it's a very professionally written report. So make sure you read through the report and not just watch this video. After this video, I would add the links of these into the description, so make sure you check them out. Now let's come back to the presentation. So there's a few things left. So this is the Xxe on Twitter. Preventing an Xxe. So what are the things as a blue team member, or if you are reporting it to a program, what are the mitigations that you should report? So disable resolution of XML external entities. So as already shown in the report also. And second thing is disable support for X-include. So X-include is a thing where you could instruct the parser to include something. And usually these are being done due to configuration options or programmatically by overriding default options. So a lot of XML parsers, they have this vulnerable or insecure default configurations, so you could change them. So that's what is being talked about in the third point. DSMR practice, resources and reading. All these links would be in the description. The fifth and the sixth point is not something I talked about, but these were good interviews and articles. So this is Ben's interview of Bugbounty from 2015, and this is an Xxe at bol.com, and it was quite a detailed one. It's a good write-up. Make sure you read that. Just for keeping this video a bit concise, I have not taken these two, but these two are very good resources. Make sure you read through them. Thanks a lot. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, I think it's high time that you do that. And if you like the video, make sure you press the like button, share it with other friends, colleagues, whomsoever feel would get benefited out of it.